"You are dead weight, Vader. I carried you long enough," Bram Calder, 38-year-old husband of Vader Ryan Calder, said inside the Calder family dining room during what he called a family meeting. Vader Ryan Calder, 32-year-old wife of Bram, stood beside the long table in a simple dark dress, staring at the divorce papers he had placed beside Calexion Therapeutics contracts. Sable Voss, 34-year-old mistress of Bram and strategic affairs director at Calexion, smiled from near Vader's usual chair like she had already taken her place. Everyone heard him. Nerissa Calder, 62-year-old mother of Bram, sat proudly at the head of the table. Bram's siblings watched in silence. Oren Pell, 46-year-old attorney of Bram and outside corporate legal advisor to Bram's executive circle, kept the divorce folder open. Even the house staff lowered their eyes. No one defended Vader. Sable leaned back and said, "A CEO needs a woman who belongs beside him at the medical convention, not someone hiding in patient charity corners." Nerissa added, "Vader never elevated this family. She only made Bram look ordinary." The room went quiet. The insult was not just cruel. It was planned, public, and meant to erase her before Bram's biggest convention appearance. Vader kept her face calm, but her fingers trembled around the pen. To them, she looked ordinary, abandoned, and finished, a quiet wife with no public title, no flashy career, and no power to fight a man who controlled a $120 million pharmaceutical company. Bram saw her silence as weakness. Sable saw it as victory, but what none of them knew was that Calexion's ownership was not as simple as Bram believed. Bram controlled operations because the board had appointed him CEO. He controlled meetings, budgets, staff, cameras, and public speeches. But the company itself was held through private shareholder records Bram had never studied beyond the surface. Behind the polished Calexion logo, behind Rhine Meridian Holdings, and behind the old trust documents protected from public view, there was a name connected to Vader's bloodline. A name powerful enough to decide who truly belonged in Calexion's future. Bram had been given authority, but not ownership. He had been given a stage, but not the foundation beneath it. He thought the company bowed because of him, unaware that the roots of that empire ran closer to the woman he was humiliating than he could imagine. Bram thought he was divorcing a useless wife before the medical convention made him untouchable. He did not know that months later, the same main screen prepared for his glory would flash an official ownership disclosure that made the entire hall turn toward Vader and made Sable step away from him like his power had suddenly become contagious. Vader signed only the receipt page without begging. Then she removed her ring, looked at Bram and said, "One day, you will learn the difference between the woman standing behind you and the foundation holding you up." No one understood. But the company records already knew her name. This is not just a story about a husband divorcing his wife in front of his family. It is about what happens when a proud man calls a woman dead weight, unaware that the empire he worships is tied to the very woman he thinks he can throw away. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. Subscribe and stand with every quiet soul who was mocked, betrayed, and underestimated before finally rising. Comment where you are watching from. The woman's hands were shaking so badly that the papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the white floor. "No, please," she whispered. "You don't understand. If my son misses this dose, we cannot just wait another month." The patient access wing of Calexion Therapeutics went silent. It was 3 months before the National Medical Advancement Convention, the event Bram believed would make him untouchable. Vader Ryan Calder, 32, the quiet wife of Calexion's CEO and the hidden daughter of the company's true controlling owner, looked up from the volunteer desk. She had come that morning wearing a simple gray dress and a visitor badge that said only Vader Calder. Her married name kept people from connecting her to the old Rhine family records, and the few executives who knew her father's private trust never spoke of it without legal permission. Across from her stood Leora Vale, 29, a tired mother whose 6-year-old son depended on one of Calexion's rare disease medication grants. Her eyes were red from crying. Behind the counter stood Mina Sol, 24, a patient access clerk at Calexion who handled grant renewals and emergency paperwork. "I'm sorry," Mina said softly. "The system says the renewal is incomplete. Without the physician verification page, the emergency grant cannot continue." Leora pressed both hands to her mouth. "The doctor sent it, I watched him send it." Vader stood slowly. Her calmness was not weakness, it was practice. She had learned long ago that panic only made powerful rooms colder. Leora, Vader said gently, do I have your permission to help Mina review the renewal steps? Leora nodded quickly. Yes, please, anything that mattered. Vader did not touch patient files without consent. She was not an employee, but she was a registered patient access volunteer under the Foundation program, with confidentiality paperwork renewed every year. Most people thought she volunteered because she had nothing better to do. They did not know she returned because the program had been born from her mother's pain. Mina opened the file on her side of the counter and turned the screen slightly, careful not to expose anything unnecessary. Vader read only the renewal status and the program code. Then she saw it, a small code near the bottom of the application. RM17. Her chest tightened. She remembered the code from years ago. RM stood for Rhine Meridian, the private holding structure her father used to protect the company's patient mission. The number marked one of the earliest compassionate care exceptions created before Calexion became large enough to attract ambitious men in expensive suits. Vader lowered her voice. This case should not be denied. Please check archive code RM17. If the child is already enrolled under compassionate care, the emergency bridge may continue while the missing physician page is corrected. Mina stared at her. How do you know that code? For half a second, Vader almost answered honestly. Because her father created it. Because this company had been built from her family's grief before Bram ever called it his empire. But Vader only said, I read old policy notes when I volunteer. Mina searched the archive. A few seconds later, her eyes widened. It's here, she whispered. Founder's compassionate care exception. Emergency bridge active for 30 days if documentation is delayed by a provider. Leora let out a broken breath. What does that mean? Vader turned to her. It means your son's medication access continues while the missing page is corrected. Leora began to cry again, but this time from relief. She grabbed Vader's hand. Thank you, I don't even know who to thank. Vader smiled faintly. Thank the people who built the program. Her voice almost broke on the last word. For a moment, the white walls faded, and Vader was 13 again, standing beside her mother's wheelchair in a narrow research hallway. Elian Rhine, Vader's late mother and the woman whose illness inspired Calexion's first patient mission, had been thin by then, but her smile was still warm. Beside her stood Dr. Solon Rhine, Vader's father and a brilliant biomedical researcher who had not yet become known as Calexion's hidden controlling owner. In his hands was the first letter ever sent by a family Calexion had helped. Elian had touched young Vader's cheek and said, "Power is only beautiful when it kneels to help someone." That sentence had stayed with Vader longer than any inheritance document. A burst of noise pulled her back. The glass doors opened, and Bram Calder entered like the room belonged to him. Bram Calder, 38, Vader's husband and the public CEO of Calexion Therapeutics, walked in surrounded by a small media crew preparing a promotional video for the National Medical Advancement Convention. His suit was perfect. His smile was practiced. Everything about him looked expensive and certain. Beside him walked Sable Voss, 34, Calexion's Strategic Affairs Director and Bram's closest workplace advisor. She wore a cream-colored suit, bright red lipstick, and the relaxed confidence of a woman who never stood anywhere by accident. Sable touched Bram's sleeve as they walked. Vader noticed. So did Mina. Bram's eyes moved across the room and landed on Vader near the patient access counter. His smile tightened. "Vader," he said quietly, low enough that the cameras would not catch it. "I didn't know you were coming today. I was helping with grant renewals," Vader said. His gaze dropped to her visitor badge, then to the file screen Mina had already turned back toward herself. "You didn't have to come here looking like staff." The words were soft, but they cut. Before Vader could answer, the media director asked Bram to stand near the wall display. The camera light turned on. Bram's face changed instantly. Warm, confident, compassionate. "At Calexion," he began, "we have always believed in patient access. A rare pathway relief program has been central to my mission since I took leadership." Vader's fingers tightened. Rare pathway relief was not the program's name. Sable looked pleased. Mina looked confused. Leora looked too grateful to understand the danger of the mistake. Vader spoke gently, almost under her breath. "Rare bridge access." Bram paused. The camera crew looked at him. Vader added softly, "The program is rare bridge access." Bram corrected himself with a smooth laugh. "Of course. Rare bridge access." The filming continued, but his jaw had hardened. When the cameras paused, Bram stepped close to Vader. "Do not correct me in front of staff again," he whispered. "I was trying to protect you from saying it wrong on camera." I don't need protection from my wife in my own company. His own company. Vader heard the words settle between them like a locked door. Before she could respond, an elderly man entered from the research history hallway carrying a leather folder. Merritt Kane, 71, the retired board secretary of Calaction and an old loyal aide to Vader's father, stopped when he saw her, his face softened with recognition. Miss Rye, Vader lifted her eyes quickly and gave the smallest shake of her head. Merritt caught himself. Mrs. Calder, he said instead, it is good to see you still care about the old programs. Bram turned. You two know each other? Merritt's eyes flicked once toward Vader. I knew her family when Calaction was smaller. Bram lost interest at once. Right. He did not ask which family. He did not ask why an old board secretary looked at his wife with respect. He had already decided Vader came from nothing worth knowing. A moment later, Vader's phone buzzed. It was a message from Tamsin Rowe, 33, Vader's childhood friend and the only person outside her family circle who knew why Calaction mattered to her. Be careful today. Sable asked someone in records about old Rhine Meridian files. Vader stared at the message. Then she noticed Bram's presentation folder on a nearby chair. A silver convention pin lay on top of it. She picked it up slowly. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "For the man who deserves the center." S. Vader knew the S was not for success. Across the room, Sable adjusted Bram's tie, let her fingers rest on his chest a second too long, and stepped into the camera frame beside him as if the place had already been promised to her. Vader placed the pin back exactly where she found it. Then, as she turned toward the research history hallway, she heard Sable speak in a low voice. By the convention, Sable said, the company needs to see who really belongs beside you. Bram said nothing. He did not move away from her hand. Vader stopped walking, one foot in the hallway where her father's old photograph still hung behind glass. For the first time, she wondered if her husband was not drifting away from her. Maybe he had already chosen where to stand. And maybe, very soon, Calaction would force everyone to learn who had been standing behind him all along. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor just as Vader heard her own name. She stopped before one foot crossed the marble line. The hallway was almost dark, lit only by the blue glow from glass offices and the red exit signs at the far end. Calaction Therapeutics felt different after hours. During the day, it was full of phones, footsteps, staff voices, and cameras. At night, it felt like a place that stored secrets inside its walls. Vader held Bram's corrected convention speech against her chest. She had returned because he had left the wrong copy in the patient access wing. The old version still had mistakes in it. It gave Bram credit for programs that existed before he became CEO. It named Rare Bridge Access incorrectly. It made him sound like the founder of things he had only inherited through position. Even after the way he had spoken to her that morning, she had come back to protect him. Then she heard Sable's voice from Bram's office. After the divorce, I should be introduced at the convention as your executive partner, Sable said. Not her, she makes you look sentimental. Vader's fingers tightened around the folder. Divorce. The word did not fall into the hallway. It struck her. She moved closer, slowly, careful not to let her shoes make sound. Bram's office had glass walls, but the blinds were half lowered. She could not see directly inside. Then she noticed the reflection in the dark window across the hall. Bram stood near his desk. Sable stood close to him, too close. She was wearing the silver convention pin Vader had found earlier, the same pin with the engraving on the back. It caught the low office light like a small blade. Bram's voice came softer than usual. Vader will not fight, she does not know how. Sable gave a quiet laugh. Then remove her before she learns. Vader's breath caught, but she did not move. Inside the office, Sable stepped closer. Her hand rested on Bram's chest, right where Vader had seen it that morning. She looked comfortable there, as if she had practiced standing in that place many times. A man at your level cannot drag a shadow onto a stage, Sable said. The convention is not only about medicine, it is about image, power. Legacy. People must look at you and see the future. Bram looked down at her hand, then at her face. And what do they see when they look at Vader? He asked. Sable smiled. Your past. Vader closed her eyes. For a second, she was not standing in an executive hallway. She was back in their first apartment years ago, when Bram owned 2 suits and 1 pair of polished shoes. The night before his first executive interview, he had sat at the edge of their bed with his head in his hands. What if I am not enough? He had asked her. Vader had knelt in front of him and held both his hands. Then I will believe for both of us until you can stand. She had stayed up with him until dawn. She had helped him rehearse answers. She had corrected his nervous mistakes. She had made him breakfast when he could barely swallow. She had kissed his forehead before he left. And she had never told him that her father's private ownership trust had quietly supported his hiring recommendation because she believed Bram deserved a chance without feeling owned by her name. Back in the hallway, Bram took Sable's hand. He lifted it to his lips and kissed it. The movement was gentle. That hurt more. Vader did not need to see anything else. She had caught the affair, but the affair was not the deepest wound. The deepest wound was hearing how easily he discussed removing her, as if she were an old chair blocking a doorway. She stepped back. Her heart pounded so hard that the folder shook against her chest. Still, she did not walk into the room. She did not scream. She did not throw the speech at him. She did not call Sable what she deserved to be called. Her silence was not surrender. It was the first wall she placed between her pain and their power over it. At the end of the hall, a woman appeared near the copy room. Ketra Lorne, 27, Sable's assistant and loyal office informant, froze when she saw Vader. Ketra's eyes dropped to the folder in Vader's hands, then moved toward Bram's office. "Mrs. Calder," Ketra said too brightly, "I did not know you were still here." Vader looked at her calmly. "Neither did they." Ketra's smile faltered. Vader walked past her toward the elevators. She kept her back straight because she knew Ketra was watching. She knew every weak breath could become office gossip before morning. The elevator doors closed. Only then did Ketra pull out her phone. She typed quickly. She saw enough. Hurt, not dangerous. Inside Bram's office, Sable's phone lit up. She glanced at it and smiled. That message would later become one of the first records recovered by compliance. Down in the parking area, the night air felt cold against Vader's face. She stood beside her car, still holding the corrected speech. For one strange moment, she wanted to laugh. Even now, the speech in her hands would save Bram from embarrassing himself at the convention. He was planning to erase her while she was still protecting him. Her phone trembled in her hand as she called Tamsin. Tamsin answered on the second ring. "Vader." Vader could barely speak. "I saw them." There was no gasp, no useless shock. Tamsin understood too much too quickly. "Do not confront him tonight," Tamsin said. Vader looked back up at the building. Bram's office light was still on. "He talked about divorce," Vader whispered, "like it was already decided." "Then listen to me carefully," Tamsin said. "Call Aurelia Fenn. She is 41, an attorney I trust with my life, and she handles quiet battles better than loud people handle easy ones. If this becomes a divorce, love will not protect you. Paper will." Vader swallowed hard. "I do not want a war." "I know," Tamsin said gently, "but they may have already started one." The words settled heavily. Vader looked at the corrected speech one last time. Then she opened the back door of her car and placed it on the seat, untouched. Bram could walk onto that stage with his own mistakes if he wanted to. Before she could get in, a shadow moved near the side entrance. Merritt Kane stepped out, his leather folder tucked under one arm. His face was troubled. "Mrs. Calder," he said quietly, "if Sable is digging near old ownership files, your father should know." Vader froze. The air seemed to thin. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Bram. "Family meeting tomorrow. Be mature." Vader stared at the message until the words blurred. She had thought the affair was the betrayal. Now she understood it was only the invitation. Somewhere above her, behind glass and light, Bram was not drifting away anymore. He was preparing to throw her away. The first thing Vader noticed was that her chair had been moved. It was no longer beside Bram's. It sat 2 spaces away, close enough to remind everyone she was still his wife, but far enough to show she had already been removed. The Calder family dining room was bright, silent, and cold. The long table was set for dinner, but no one had touched the food. Silver covers sat over plates like sealed evidence. Crystal glasses waited beside folded napkins. At the head of the table sat Nerissa Calder, 62, Bram's mother, and the proud matriarch of the Calder family. Her back was straight, her pearls were perfect, and her face held the calm cruelty of someone who had planned every detail. Bram sat to her right. Sable stood behind his chair. Before moving behind Bram, Sable had been standing beside Vader's usual chair, one hand resting lightly on the back of it, as if she wanted everyone to notice that she had already taken Vader's place. She was wearing the silver convention pin. Vader's stomach tightened. Orin Pell, 46, Bram's personal divorce attorney and outside corporate legal advisor, who had previously advised Bram on executive matters at Calexion, sat with a leather folder in front of him. Beside the divorce folder sat a stack of Calexion convention contracts and executive presentation approvals, making the marriage ambush look like another item on Bram's business schedule. Torrin Calder, 35, Bram's younger brother and loyal family supporter, leaned back with a smirk. Elska Calder, 31, Bram's sister and Nerissa's favorite gossip partner, watched Vader as if she had been waiting all day for this moment. Ketra Lorne stood near the sideboard with a stack of presentation files, pretending she was only there for work. Two family advisors sat near Oren, Coldus Wren, 58, the Calder family's financial advisor, and Noel Greer, 54, a private business consultant. Nerissa often used to polish family decisions before they became public. Near the doorway stood Pella Knox, 45, the Calder family's senior housekeeper, and Dana Vale, 30, a young server who looked like he wished he could disappear into the wall. Everyone was already seated or placed. Only Vader had walked in without knowing the full script. She looked at Bram. "What is this?" Bram did not stand. "Sit down, Vader." His voice was calm but not gentle. She looked at Sable. "Why is she here?" Nerissa answered before Bram could. "Because this concerns Bram's future. Unlike some people, Sable has helped him build one." Sable smiled softly and said, "A CEO needs a woman who belongs beside him at the medical convention, not someone hiding in patient charity corners." The words landed hard, but Vader did not flinch. She walked to the chair that had been left for her and sat down slowly. She could feel every eye on her. Even the house staff had gone still. Oren opened his leather folder. "These are preliminary divorce terms," he said. "You are not being asked to sign the full agreement tonight. You are being formally served with notice and proposed settlement conditions." That was the first thing that made Vader's mind clear. They wanted her shocked, not informed. She turned to Bram. "You brought your mother, your mistress, and your attorney to serve me divorce papers over dinner." Sable's eyes sharpened at the word mistress. Bram's jaw tightened. "Do not make this ugly." Vader looked around the table, at Nerissa's cold face, at Torrens' smile, at Elska's eager silence, at Sable's hand resting close to Bram's shoulder. Then she looked back at him. "You arranged ugly before I walked in." For 1 second, Bram looked embarrassed. Then pride covered it. Nerissa lifted her chin. "This family has been patient with you, Vader, but Bram is no longer a struggling young executive. He is the face of Calaxian Therapeutics. He needs someone beside him who understands visibility, influence, and image." Vader said nothing. Nerissa continued, each word clean and practiced. "You are too quiet for his position, too plain for public events, too attached to little charity corners in the company when Bram is preparing for the largest medical convention of his career. You disappear in rooms where a wife should elevate him." Elska whispered, "She never even tries." Torren laughed softly. "Bram is about to stand before doctors, investors, and the whole industry. He cannot walk in their dragging dead weight." The room went silent. Vader looked at Bram. She waited. This was his chance. One word from him could reject the insult. One word could prove that the man she had loved still existed somewhere beneath the suit, the title, and the pride. Bram looked at her with tired irritation, as if her pain was another task on his schedule. Then he said it. "You are dead weight, Vader. I carried you long enough." The sentence cut through her cleanly. Sable lowered her eyes, pretending to be uncomfortable, but the corner of her mouth lifted. Elska whispered, finally, so softly that almost no one heard. Vader heard. For a strange moment, sound left the room. She could see Bram's mouth still moving, but her mind went somewhere else. Years earlier, Bram had stood in a small chapel, holding her hands. He had been nervous then, still unsure of himself, still grateful when people believed in him. He had slid the wedding ring onto her finger and whispered, "I will never make you feel small." Back in the dining room, Vader looked down at that same ring. It had once felt warm. Now it felt like proof of a promise he had broken in front of witnesses. Bram's voice returned to her. "I built Calaxian," he said. "I built this life. You stood close enough to benefit from it, and now you think loyalty is the same as contribution." That almost made her laugh, not because it was funny, because it was so deeply wrong that the truth sat inside her like a locked storm. She thought of the patient access wing, the old program codes, her father's handwritten notes, the first research hallway, the private shareholder records Bram had never cared enough to understand. She thought of every speech she had corrected, every name she had reminded him of, every mistake she had quietly caught before it reached a boardroom. He thought she had stood close enough to benefit. He did not know he had been standing on her family's foundation. Oren slid the folder closer. The terms are generous considering the length of the marriage and Mrs. Calder's limited financial contribution. Vader's eyes moved to him. There it was again. Limited contribution. She could have ended the room with one sentence. "My father controls the company your client thinks he built," but she did not say it. She remembered her father's warning before her wedding. Dr. Solon Rhine had stood beside her in a quiet room while she adjusted her veil. He had looked at her with love and worry. "Do not show a man the doors your name can open," he had said, "until you know whether he respects the woman standing in front of them." At the time, she had thought he was being too careful. Now she understood he had been trying to save her from this exact table. Veda lifted her eyes to Bram. "Is this what you believe?" she asked. "Not your mother, not Sable, you." Bram leaned back, almost relieved to say it plainly. "I believe I outgrew you." Something inside Veda became very still, not dead, still. The kind of stillness that came before a door closed forever. She removed her wedding ring slowly. No one spoke. Even Nerissa's face shifted, just a little, as if she had expected tears and received something more unsettling. Veda placed the ring on top of the receipt page beside the divorce folder. Then she reached for Oren's pen. Oren's mouth twitched in victory, but only for a moment. Veda signed one page only, the receipt acknowledging that the papers had been handed to her. She did not sign the agreement. Oren noticed. So did Bram. Before she stepped away, Veda picked up the ring again and closed it inside her palm. She would not leave even that piece of her story for Sable to smile over. Then she stood. "One day, Bram," she said quietly, "you will learn the difference between the woman standing behind you and the foundation holding you up." Torren laughed, still making speeches. Bram smiled like he had won, but Oren did not laugh. He stared at the signature on the receipt page, Veda Reinkolder. His eyes narrowed. Then his face slowly lost color. Veda turned and walked toward the door, leaving the untouched dinner and their false victory behind her. No one at the table understood why Oren had gone pale, but before the night ended, one of them would begin searching a name that should have stayed buried. The moment Veda stepped into the hallway, Sable followed her like a shadow wearing perfume. "Veda," the voice was soft, but it stopped her more sharply than a shout. Rain beat against the tall windows of the Kolder house. Behind Veda, the dining room still glowed with warm light, full of untouched food, false witnesses, and the divorce folder Bram thought would finish her. Ahead of her, the front door waited like the only honest thing in the house. Veda did not turn at first. Sable came closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You handled that better than I expected," she said. "I thought you would beg." Veda slowly faced her. For a second, Sable looked pleased. She thought pain would make Veda small. She thought silence meant defeat. Veda's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "You are confusing silence with defeat." Sable's smile weakened. Veda did not wait for a reply. She opened the front door and stepped into the rain. Cold water hit her face at once. It soaked her hair, her dress, her sleeves. She had no umbrella. She had no coat. She had only the divorce folder under one arm and her wedding ring hidden in her closed fist. She did not know why she had taken it. Maybe because love did not stop being real, just because betrayal became louder. Maybe because she needed to remember that Bram had not only insulted her, he had broken something sacred in a room full of witnesses. At the end of the driveway, Tamsin's car waited with its lights on. Veda walked toward it slowly at first, then faster, as if the house behind her might call her back into humiliation if she gave it time. Tamsin opened the passenger door before Veda reached it. The moment Veda sat down, the strength left her body. She bent forward, one hand over her mouth, the other still holding the ring. Her shoulders shook, but she made almost no sound. That made it worse. It was the kind of crying that came from a place too deep for noise. Tamsin did not rush her. She only reached across and took the wet folder from Veda's lap. "He staged it," Veda whispered. "He did not even look ashamed." Tamsin's hands tightened on the folder. Veda opened her palm. The ring rested there, bright and cruel under the car's dim light. "He said I was dead weight." Tamsin closed her eyes for a second. "I am so sorry. I'm not crying because I lost him," Veda said, though tears kept falling. "I am crying because I kept loving the man he used to be while he was rehearsing how to throw me away." Tamsin started the car. "Then we are not going home," she said. Veda looked at her. "Where are we going?" "To someone who knows how to turn pain into paper." The drive was quiet except for the rain and Veda's broken breathing. The city lights blurred across the windshield. Veda rested her head against the window and watched every reflection pass like pieces of a life she no longer recognized. She remembered her mother's voice from years before. Elian Rhine had been lying in a hospital bed, thin and tired, but her eyes had still been bright. Veda had been young, angry at doctors, angry at money, angry that love could not save everyone. Her mother had touched her hand and said, "Never beg to be seen by people who benefit from your invisibility." At the time, Veda had not understood. Now, soaked in rain and shame, she understood too well. Tamsin stopped outside a narrow private office building where only one floor still had lights on. Inside, the walls were quiet. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and a woman in a dark green blouse was waiting beside a conference table. Aurelia Fenn, 41, was a family law attorney and crisis strategist trusted by Tamsin, now becoming Vader's legal ally. Her face was calm but not cold. She looked like someone who had seen people break and knew better than to ask them to be strong too quickly. She offered Vader a towel first, not advice. A towel. That small kindness almost made Vader cry again. Then Aurelia sat down and opened the divorce folder. Her eyes moved over the pages with quiet speed. Every few seconds she made a note. She did not gasp. She did not insult Bram. She did not waste Vader's pain on easy anger. After several minutes she looked up. This was not just a divorce, Aurelia said. This was a containment strategy. Vader wiped her face. What does that mean? It means they expected you to be too shocked to think. The terms are rushed. The confidentiality language is too aggressive. Orin framed you as non-contributing, which protects Bram's image. Timing is tied to the medical convention, and Sable's presence at the family meeting was not emotional support. It was a power display. Tamsin leaned forward. So they planned it. Aurelia tapped the folder. Yes, and they planned it badly because they assumed Vader had no counsel, no leverage, and no record. Vader looked down at her ring. I could end this with one phone call to my father. The room became still. Aurelia did not ask who her father was. Tamsin had already told her enough. You could end the emotion that way, Aurelia said, but if you want truth to survive lawyers, boardrooms, and cameras, we document first. Vader looked at her. Cameras? The convention is coming, Aurelia said. If Bram is using public image as a weapon, then anything we do must be clean enough to stand in public. Vader understood. Her father's name could crush Bram in a moment, but a moment was not enough. Bram would call it revenge. Sable would call it bitterness. Nerissa would call it manipulation. Orin would wrap it in legal doubt. Paper would not tremble. Evidence would not cry. Aurelia leaned back. Does Bram know about Rhine Meridian Holdings? Vader shook her head. He knows the name as a shareholder entity. It appears in board documents. But he does not know my father controls it through the family trust. He never cared enough to ask who stood behind the entity. Then we keep that quiet until the law is ready, Aurelia said. No threats. No emotional confession, no warning. While Vader sat in that quiet office, the Calder house was still glowing with celebration. Nerissa raised a glass at the dining room table. To Bram's clean future. By morning, Bram had authorized Orin to file the divorce petition, confident that Vader would be too humiliated to challenge anything. Sable touched Bram's shoulder. By the convention, no one will remember Vader was ever beside him. Bram smiled, but Orin did not drink. In a side room, he opened his laptop and searched Rhine Meridian Holdings through a restricted corporate database. The screen loaded slowly. Then a warning appeared. Trustee-level authorization required. Orin stared at it. His face tightened. Back in Aurelia's office, 3 folders were placed on the table. Divorce response, marital misconduct evidence, collection governance review. Vader's fingers moved toward the 3rd folder before she understood why. Aurelia watched her carefully. Before we prove what he did to you as a husband, she said, we need to know what he has done with the company he thinks he owns. Vader looked at the folder. Outside, the rain had not stopped, but somewhere beneath the sound of it, something colder and stronger had begun to wake. The front door opened before Vader could knock. For one sharp second, she forgot how to breathe. Dr. Solon Rhine, 64, Vader's father, a retired biomedical researcher and the hidden controlling owner of Calexion Therapeutics through the Solon Rhine Family Trust, stood in the doorway wearing an old gray sweater and reading glasses pushed low on his nose. He did not look like a man connected to a $120 million pharmaceutical company. He looked like a tired father who had been waiting for bad news. Behind Vader, rain still fell across the stone path. Her dress was damp. Her hair clung to her face. In one hand, she held the divorce folder. In the other, she held the wedding ring Bram had turned into a wound. Solon looked at the folder first, then he looked at her face. What did he do? He asked quietly. Vader tried to answer, but the words broke before they came out. She stepped inside the old house and the warmth almost made her knees weaken. He called me dead weight, she whispered. For a moment, Solon's face changed. Not with rage, something deeper, something older. A pain that looked like it had found a new place to live. Then he opened his arms. Vader went into them like a child who had finally reached the only safe place left. Solon held her tightly and said, then he never understood what you were carrying. That was when Vader cried again, not loudly, not dramatically. She simply broke against her father's chest, while Tamsin stood behind her with wet eyes, and Aurelia carried the legal folders inside without saying a word. The house was quiet around them. It was not flashy. There were no golden walls, no crystal stairs, no loud signs of wealth. The rooms were filled with medical books, framed research certificates, handwritten patient letters, and old photographs of Veda's mother, Eliane Rhine. Everywhere Veda looked, she saw history, not the kind Bram liked to put on screens. The kind built by grief, long nights, failed treatments, and promises made beside hospital beds. After a while, Solon led them to the archive room at the back of the house. It was the only room Veda had avoided for years because every shelf smelled like her childhood and her mother's illness. Solon unlocked the door. Inside were metal cabinets, old lab journals, sealed boxes, framed newspaper clippings, and binders marked with Kalixan's earliest name. A glass case stood against one wall. Inside it hung Solon's first white lab coat. Veda stopped in front of it. She remembered being small enough to hide behind that coat when her mother was still alive. Solon opened the first cabinet and removed a thin brown file. This was before Kalixan had major investors, he said, before boardrooms, before valuation reports, before men like Bram thought a company was something you stood on top of. He placed the file on the table. Inside was a photograph of a small rented laboratory. The floor was cracked. The walls were plain. A younger Solon stood near a microscope, thin from sleepless nights. Beside him sat Eliane in a treatment chair, smiling even though her hands were covered with a blanket. Veda touched the edge of the photograph. Solon's voice softened. "Your mother was the reason I built it. Not money, not power, her." A flash of memory moved through Veda. She was 13 again, standing beside Eliane's bed. Her mother's fingers were weak, but her eyes were still full of light. "If this company ever becomes large," Eliane had told Solon, "promise me it will still bend down to help ordinary people." Solon had promised. Then he had kept that promise even after she was gone. He showed Veda the first patient access records, the first compassionate care approvals, and the first legal formation documents. Kalixan had started as a research project born from loss. It became a company only because families needed more help than one doctor could give. Then Solon opened a larger folder with a dark blue cover. The label read, Rhine Meridian Holdings. Aurelia stepped closer. Solon said, "When Kalixan grew, I placed majority ownership here. Rhine Meridian Holdings is controlled by the Solon Rhine Family Trust. The structure protects the company from becoming a trophy for ambitious executives." Veda swallowed. "And Bram was hired years later," Solon said. "He was polished, ambitious. He seemed disciplined. The board recommended him." "You believed he had potential." Veda looked away. Solon did not accuse her. "He became CEO by appointment," he continued. "That gave him authority over operations, budgets, staff, public appearances. It did not give him ownership." He looked at his daughter. "I gave him authority. I never gave him ownership." The words settled across the room. Aurelia opened her notebook. "Does Bram know Rhine Meridian controls the majority?" "He knows Rhine Meridian exists as a shareholder entity," Solon said. "It is named in reports he receives, but the trust behind it is private, and he never cared about anything that did not make him look powerful." Veda's voice came small. "Maybe I should have told him." Solon turned to her. "A husband should not need your inheritance before he respects your humanity." The room became still. Veda looked down at the ring in her palm. For years she had believed keeping her identity quiet was an act of love. She wanted Bram to see her before he saw her father's name. Now she understood the painful truth. Bram had seen her clearly enough. He simply had not valued what he saw. A knock sounded at the archive door. Merritt Kane entered with a leather case. He looked at Veda with sadness, then placed the case on the table. "I brought the old board files," he said, "and Bram's current CEO contract." Aurelia opened the files at once. Merritt pointed to the pages carefully. "Bram is CEO, not owner. Rhine Meridian controls majority ownership. Dr. Rhine is the principal beneficial owner through the trust. The board can suspend executive authority for conduct damaging public trust, fiduciary integrity, or institutional reputation. Also, the upcoming medical convention already includes a leadership presentation. If approved properly, a governance disclosure can be made there." Veda looked at him. "So the convention can be used legally?" Aurelia answered before Merritt could. "If the board approves it, if the disclosure is corporate rather than personal, and if the evidence supports a governance concern, yes." Far away from that quiet archive, Bram sat in his private study with Sable and Oren. Oren's laptop was open. He asked carefully, "What do you actually know about Veda's father?" Bram laughed. "Old lab man, quiet. probably had one good patent and retired. Sable's eyes narrowed. Rhine, she said softly, that name keeps coming up. Then she sent Ketra one message, find out everything about the Rhine name. Quietly, back in the archive, Solon handed Vader a sealed envelope. Inside was an old photograph of young Vader standing beside him in Calixtion's first research wing. On the back, in Solon's handwriting, were the words, "For Vader, may this company heal more than it earns." Vader held the photograph to her chest. Aurelia, still reading, suddenly stopped. Her finger rested on one clause in Bram's CEO contract. Executive authority may be suspended upon conduct damaging fiduciary integrity, public trust, or institutional reputation. She looked up at Vader. Your heartbreak and his leadership may be connected. Vader slowly closed the archive folder. The girl who had once hidden behind her father's lab coat was gone. In her place stood a woman Bram had mistaken for nothing. Then we investigate both, she said. And somewhere across town, Sable's search for the Rhine name had just opened the first door she would regret touching. Based on your uploaded continuation, I revised scenes 610 and tightened the investigation, board approval, convention screen reveal, Bram's suspension, Sable's fall, and the closing CTA. Stop the deletion now. Aurelia's voice cut through the conference room like a blade. Across the glass table, Selwyn Ma, 52, Calixtion's lead internal auditor assigned by the board to preserve executive records, froze with one hand over his laptop. Beside him sat Nomi Cal, 39, Calixtion's compliance director responsible for ethics records, access logs, and internal communication reviews. Her face had gone pale. On the screen in front of them, a line of flagged company messages was being moved out of an internal folder. Someone inside Calixtion was trying to erase evidence. Vader stood behind Aurelia, silent, but her heart slammed against her ribs. For 10 quiet weeks after the family meeting, Vader did not confront Bram. Aurelia gathered records, Solon activated ownership review, and Calixtion's board watched the convention materials closely. Now, with the convention only days away, the truth had moved from old papers into living danger. Now that truth had moved from old papers into living danger. Aurelia leaned forward. Lock the account, preserve the server image, notify Callow Reeve that we may have active destruction of records. Nomi moved fast, typing with shaking fingers. The account belongs to Ketra Lorne. Tamsin, standing near the wall with her arms folded, looked at Vader. Sable's assistant. Vader said nothing. She did not need to. Everyone in the room understood what it meant. This review was not illegal spying. It had been opened under board authority after Solon, through the Solon Rhine Family Trust and Rhine Meridian Holdings, requested a governance audit. Calixtion's board had authorized Selwyn and Nomi to preserve records tied to executive conduct, convention materials, and possible misuse of company resources. Bram still held the CEO title, but his actions were now being reviewed by the people who had the power to appoint or suspend him. Aurelia placed 2 thick folders on the table. One was marked Divorce Misconduct. The other was marked Corporate Governance. "They're separate investigations," she said, "but they may touch the same people." Solon sat at the end of the table, his old hands folded. Merritt stood beside him with a leather file case. The room was inside Aurelia's private law office, but the work had already reached Calixtion's compliance archive and executive records through official board channels. Aurelia opened the first folder. "Divorce Misconduct," she said. "We document Sable's physical presence at the family meeting. Bram's affair." The rushed divorce terms, the dead weight statement, the witnesses, the pressure, the confidentiality language designed to silence Vader. Vader looked down at the table. The phrase still hurt. Dead weight. It had followed her from the dining room, through the rain, into her father's house, and now into a legal file. Somehow seeing it written on paper made it feel colder and more real. Aurelia opened the second folder. "Corporate Governance," she continued. "We document Bram allowing Sable to influence executive decisions while privately involved with him. Convention materials changed without approval. Ketra spreading rumors through company channels. Oren mixing personal divorce pressure with corporate legal access. Bram using company image resources to make himself look like Calixtion's founder. Patient access programs being rebranded around his personal legacy." Selwyn nodded grimly. "There are already signs of that." He pulled up a slide deck from the convention file. The title page read, "Calixtion Therapeutics, the future under Bram." Calder. Vader stared at it. "Not Calixtion's future. Bram." Nomi clicked to the next slide. References to Rhine Meridian were removed from the draft. Also, older patient access language was replaced with leadership language centered on Bram. Solon's face tightened, but he did not speak. Vader knew what that silence cost him. Calixion was not only a company to her father, it was the place where grief had been forced to become useful. It was the promise he had made after her mother died, and Bram was turning that promise into a stage. Aurelia looked at Vader. This is why we do not shout. People can dismiss shouting, they cannot dismiss records. Vader nodded, though her throat burned. As the auditors worked, more records came forward. Old emails showed Vader had quietly corrected Bram's speeches before board presentations. Staff notes showed she had redirected patient complaints before they reached investors. Calendar logs showed she had helped arrange meetings with patient families when Bram forgot names. Draft files showed she had warned him several times when his public claims about company history were inaccurate. Bram had called her decoration, but the records showed something else. She had been damage control. A flashback rose in Vader's mind. She was 15, standing in her father's study while Solon rejected a profitable distribution deal. The investors had offered money, expansion, attention, but the deal would have made medication harder for poorer families to afford. Young Vader had asked, "Isn't growth good?" Solon had looked tired but certain. "A company loses its soul before it loses its money. If we protect the soul, the money will follow honestly. If we sell the soul, the money will only bury the body." Back in Aurelia's office, Vader understood. Bram had not destroyed Calixion yet, but he had started selling its soul for applause. Across town, Bram sat in his executive suite with Sable beside him. The office lights were bright, the city beyond the windows dark. "Has she called?" Sable asked. Bram laughed. "No, Vader is too emotional to fight. She will disappear for a while, then sign when reality hits." Sable walked behind him and rested both hands on his shoulders. "Good. Then we make sure the convention shows the world you were always the future." Bram smiled at his reflection in the window. Sable turned to Ketra, who stood near the desk holding a tablet. "Delete the guest list drafts that show Vader removed," Sable said, "and anything about Rhine Meridian in the convention notes. That old ownership language makes Bram look like an employee." Ketra hesitated. "Should we delete company messages? If compliance checks," Sable's eyes hardened, "only important people get investigated." Ketra swallowed and nodded, but her hands shook when she left the room. Back in Aurelia's office, Nomi's laptop chimed. "I found the deletion request," she said. It came from Ketra's access, but several messages were forwarded from Sable's account first. Selwyn leaned closer. "Can we recover them?" Nomi nodded. "Some, not all, but enough to show intent." Aurelia's face remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. "Preserve everything, every timestamp, every forwarded draft, every edited slide." Vader watched the screen fill with recovered files. Each one was a small piece of truth coming back from the dark. Then Nomi stopped scrolling. "There is one email you need to see." She opened it. The sender was Sable. The recipient was Bram. The subject line read, "Convention positioning." The message was short. "Once Vader is gone, remove old ownership language from the convention deck. The screen should show Calixion as your legacy." No one spoke. Aurelia read the email twice. Then she turned the laptop toward Vader. "They were not only erasing you from the marriage," she said, "they were erasing your father from his own company." Vader's grief changed shape. It did not disappear. It became sharper, cleaner, stronger. She looked at Solon. His eyes were fixed on the email, but Vader knew he was seeing something older than words on a screen. He was seeing her mother's promise being scraped away for Bram's pride. Vader placed her hand on the table. "Then we do this properly," she said. "No shouting, no warning, no mistakes." Aurelia closed the divorce folder and left the governance folder open. "Good," she said, "because now we do not just need evidence of betrayal, we need evidence of motive." Outside the office windows, morning had started to thin the darkness, and somewhere inside Calixion, a deleted message was waiting to become the first crack in Bram Calder's empire. "When I built Calixion into the company you see today," the words rolled through the empty convention hall like a lie searching for applause. Bram stood beneath a giant screen, smiling as if the room already belonged to him. Rows of empty seats stretched before the stage. Bright lights burned down from above. Behind him, the huge screen displayed the rehearsal title in shining white letters, Calixion Therapeutics. The future under Bram Calder. The words were so large that even Bram seemed smaller beneath them. But he did not feel small. He looked powerful, certain, almost royal. In the front row, Sable clapped slowly, her smile full of pride. Nerissa sat beside her, dressed in a dark suit, watching her son like he had already won. Oren stood near the side aisle with his arms folded and his face tense. Ketra held a tablet, checking the convention schedule and pretending not to notice Oren's discomfort. Near the control booth stood Price Loman, 42, the convention media coordinator hired to manage stage screens, presentation files, and live transitions for the National Medical Advancement Convention. He listened through a headset while two technicians tested the lighting. Bram turned toward Price. "Make sure that title stays long enough for photographs," Price nodded. "Of course, Mr. Calder, the active file is the one your office approved." Sable rose from her seat and walked toward the stage steps. "It should stay longer," she said. "People need to connect Calexion with Bram's name before he even speaks." Bram smiled down at her. "You always understand the moment." Sable's hand rested on the edge of the stage, close to his shoe, as if even the platform was something she planned to climb. Oren looked away. He had seen enough legal documents to know the title was dangerous. Bram had built a career inside Calexion, but he had not built Calexion itself. Still, Oren said nothing. He had already helped arrange the family meeting. He had already placed divorce papers in front of Vader. Silence was no longer neutral for him. It was self-protection. Bram turned back to the empty hall. "When I built Calexion into the company you see today," he repeated, "I did it with one belief: medicine must be led by vision." No one corrected him, not Sable, not Nerissa, not Oren. The lie stayed in the air and grew comfortable. Across town, Vader sat in Aurelia's strategy room, staring at a different kind of screen. There were no stage lights there, no applause, no silver titles, only documents, timelines, evidence folders, and the quiet weight of truth. Solon sat beside her, silent and tired. Tamsin stood near the window with a cup of untouched coffee. Merritt opened an old leather case on the table. Across from them sat Callow Reeve, 59, the board chair of Calexion Therapeutics and a longtime governance officer appointed to protect the company's legal and ethical interests. Callow was not emotional. He did not care about revenge. That was why Aurelia had insisted he be present. The next step had to be legal, not personal. Merritt removed the first document. "The original founder certificate," he said. He placed it on the table. Then another. "Meridian ownership records." Another. "Bram Calder's CEO contract." Another. "The governance clause." Another. "Recovered emails from Sable Voss regarding removal of ownership references." Another. "Audit notes showing staff intimidation and unauthorized convention edits." Each paper landed softly, but to Vader it sounded like a door locking behind Bram. Aurelia looked at Callow. "He is preparing to make a symbolic ownership claim in front of doctors, investors, and medical journalists. That makes this more than a marital issue." Callow adjusted his glasses. "If the convention materials imply he founded or owns the company, the board has a duty to correct the record." Vader looked down at her hands. She did not feel victorious. She felt hollow. Only days ago, she had wanted a husband who remembered kindness. Now she was sitting in a room where legal documents were becoming the language of her broken marriage. Solon noticed her silence. "Vader," she looked at him. His voice was gentle. "Do you want him ruined, or do you want the truth restored?" The question hurt because it was fair. For a moment, the room faded, and Vader remembered her first date with Bram. They had eaten at a small, quiet restaurant, long before cameras followed him and before Sable ever learned his name. Bram had worn an old jacket and apologized twice because he thought it looked cheap. "I do not need to be powerful," he had told her that night. "I just want to do something meaningful." She had believed him. She had loved that man. Now she wondered when meaning became image, when confidence became hunger, when the man who wanted to help people became the man who wanted to be worshipped for helping them. Vader blinked away the memory. "I wanted a husband," she said quietly. "I lost that." No one interrupted her. "But Calexion belongs to patience before it belongs to anyone's pride," she continued. "Restore the truth." Aurelia's face softened for only a second. Then she returned to the documents. "Then we proceed carefully, no emotional exposure, no personal speech, no surprise accusation. If the board acts, it acts because the company record must be corrected." Callow nodded. "A formal disclosure can be prepared if the evidence is complete." "It is getting complete," Aurelia said. Back at the convention hall, the rehearsal ended with laughter. Bram hosted a small private dinner in a side room near the stage. The long table held expensive food, white flowers, and a clear view of the empty hall where he would soon speak. Nerissa raised her glass. "To the man who built Calexion." Bram lifted his own glass, pleased. Sable raised hers next. and to the woman who will finally stand beside him properly. Everyone understood she meant herself. Nerissa smiled. Ketra laughed softly. Bram did not correct Sable. He only looked at her with the kind of pride he had once reserved for Vader. Oren forced a smile but barely drank. His phone buzzed under the table. A message from an unknown sender appeared. Ownership file access denied. Rhine Meridian authorization required. Oren turned the phone face down. Sable noticed. "What is wrong?" she asked him. "Nothing," Oren said too quickly, but Sable had already learned to fear that word. Later, during one final technical test, Price loaded a transition package sent through the approved Calaxian media portal. The giant screen blinked from black to white. For less than 2 seconds, a file name flashed across the display before Price quickly cut the feed. 120 Meridian ownership transition. Most people missed it. Sable did not. Her smile vanished. Bram was speaking to Nerissa and did not see. Oren saw Sable's face and went still. Sable turned slowly toward Ketra. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Find out what Rhine Meridian really controls. Tonight." Ketra swallowed. And above them, the blank convention screen waited like it already knew whose name would appear next. "Find it, Ketra, now." Sable's voice was sharp enough to make Ketra drop the tablet. They were inside Bram's executive office at Calaxian, long after most staff had gone home. The convention rehearsal had ended hours ago, but the file name that flashed on the giant screen still burned in Sable's mind. 120 Meridian ownership transition. Bram stood by the window, annoyed more than afraid. "You are overreacting." Sable turned on him. "No, Bram. Someone is preparing something behind your back." "With what power?" he asked. "Vader has no power." Sable stepped closer. "Power is not the point. Perception is. If she embarrasses you before the convention, people will not wait for facts. They will smell weakness." That word reached him. Weakness. Bram's face changed. He could survive cruelty. He could survive divorce. But he could not survive looking weak in front of doctors, investors, and cameras. "What do you want?" he asked. Sable did not hesitate. "We write the story first." By morning, whispers began moving through Calaxian. Ketra sent careful messages from her desk, never saying enough to look guilty, but saying enough to poison the air. Vader is unstable. She is bitter about the divorce. She has been trying to interfere with convention planning. She cannot accept that Bram moved on. The gossip spread through assistants, communications staff, and junior managers. Some people believed it because Bram looked powerful and Vader had always been quiet. Others doubted it but said nothing because silence felt safer than choosing a side. Nerissa helped from outside the company. During calls with family, friends, and social contacts, she sighed as if she were the victim. "Some women cannot accept being outgrown," she said. Bram tried to be kind, but Vader is making this difficult. Bram did not correct her. He benefited from every lie, so he let every lie breathe. In Aurelia's law office, the first alert arrived before noon. Nomi had flagged unusual message traffic inside Calaxian's communications system. Selwyn found edits to internal convention files. Tamsin received screenshots from an employee who still respected Vader from the patient access wing. Aurelia read everything in silence. Then she stood. "Send the preservation notices." Her staff moved fast. Formal notices went to Bram, Sable, Ketra, Oren, Calaxian Communications, and the convention media contractors. Each notice was clear. Every message, draft, file, calendar entry, and deleted item related to Vader, Sable, the convention, Rhine Meridian, and Bram's leadership claims had to be preserved. Deleted communications could be treated as evidence destruction. Across the company, phones buzzed. Ketra read the notice in the copy room and felt the blood leave her face. She had already deleted messages for Sable, not all of them, but enough. Her hands shook as she opened a private folder where she had saved screenshots just in case Sable ever tried to blame her. There were messages about removing Vader from the guest list, messages about calling Vader unstable, messages about stripping Rhine Meridian references from the convention deck. Ketra stared at the files. For the first time, loyalty to Sable looked less like protection and more like a trap. She contacted her own counsel and quietly arranged for copies to reach Aurelia. That was the first crack in Sable's final attack. Later that afternoon, the Calaxian board gathered in a closed conference room. Callow sat at the head of the table. Solon was present through majority owner authority, calm but grave. Aurelia attended as Vader's attorney and advisor to the ownership side. Selwyn and Nomi stood before the screen with the compliance findings. Vader sat beside Tamsin at the far end of the room. She did not speak at first. She listened. Selwyn began with the affair disclosure failure. Bram had allowed Sable to influence convention planning, staff access, guest lists, and public messaging while secretly involved with her. Because Sable reported into the executive structure around Bram, that relationship created a conflict of interest. Because he had hidden it while letting her help shape company messaging, it became a governance issue. Nomi presented screenshots showing Sable's instructions to remove Vader and reduce references to Rhine Meridian. Then came Oren. His name appeared in meeting notes tied to both the divorce pressure and corporate legal access. He had helped Bram treat a marriage ambush like a business cleanup. Aurelia's voice was calm. That overlap matters. Personal pressure was being used to protect public image. The board members shifted. Nomi moved to the next file. It showed Bram's revised convention speech. The line appeared on the screen. When I built Calaction into the company you see today, a low murmur passed around the table. Callow's mouth tightened. That is not merely flattering language. It is misleading. Selwyn nodded. The draft also removes ownership acknowledgements and replaces patient access history with language centered on Bram's leadership. Solon looked down. Vader saw his hand close slowly around the edge of the table. For a moment, she was no longer in a boardroom. She was a child again, standing outside her mother's room while her parents spoke in low voices. Ilian's body had been weak, but her voice had still carried love. If the company survives me, Ilian had told Solon, promise me it will never become a monument to ego. Solon had promised her. Now Bram was trying to turn that promise into a spotlight. Vader blinked back the memory and looked at the screen. This was not only about a husband who betrayed her, it was about a man trying to rewrite the meaning of the company her mother's suffering had helped create. Callow leaned back slowly. This is no longer a private marriage scandal, he said. This is a governance crisis. No one disagreed. Aurelia explained the next step. Because Bram was scheduled to speak publicly at the National Medical Advancement Convention, and because his materials suggested false personal ownership and founder-like authority, Calaction had a duty to correct the public record. It cannot be a surprise attack, she said. It must be an official disclosure. Board-approved, ownership-authorized, legally clean. Solon looked at Vader. This will be public. I know, Vader said. You do not have to stand there. Vader swallowed. Part of her wanted to stay hidden. That had always felt safer, but hiding had allowed Bram to call her small. It had allowed Sable to step into her place. It had allowed Calaction's history to be treated like old dust. I am not doing this to punish him, Vader said quietly. I am doing it because the lie is standing on a stage. The room went still. Callow called the vote. One by one, the board members approved the motion. Bram's executive authority would be suspended pending governance review. A formal ownership and leadership disclosure would be made at the convention. Rhine Meridian would be named. Solon's role would be acknowledged. Vader would be introduced as the incoming majority owner representative, with board chair appointment to be finalized after the governance transition. When the final vote passed, Aurelia received the signed board resolution. She slid it across the table to Vader. The screen is no longer revenge, she said. It is truth with witnesses. Vader touched the paper. Across town, Bram adjusted his convention tie in a mirror, still believing the stage was his. But the screen behind him had already chosen a different story. The lights hit Bram like a crown. He stood at the side of the convention stage, smiling as cameras flashed, and hundreds of people filled the main hall. Doctors, investors, medical journalists, board guests, and company partners sat beneath the huge screen that stretched across the back wall. Every seat seemed to face him. Every light seemed to belong to him. That was how Bram wanted it. He wore the silver tie Sable had chosen. His suit was dark, sharp, and perfect. Sable stood beside him in a cream dress, her hand resting near his sleeve as if she had already been announced as the woman at his side. Nerissa sat proudly in the reserved family row with Torrin and Elska beside her. Orin sat at the edge of that same row, stiff and pale, his eyes moving often to the control booth. Bram glanced across the hall. No Vader. A satisfied smile touched his mouth. He believed she had stayed away because she was ashamed. He believed the family meeting had broken her. He believed the woman he called dead weight had finally understood her place. Sable leaned close. This is your room. Bram nodded. It always was. Win 45, the convention announcer responsible for introducing keynote speakers, stepped to the side microphone and called his name. Please welcome Bram Calder, Chief Executive Officer of Calaction Therapeutics. Applause rose. Bram stepped onto the stage like a man walking into his own portrait. He lifted one hand, waited for the applause to settle, and turned slightly so photographers could catch him with the screen behind him. The main screen displayed Calaction Therapeutics, Future of Rare Disease Access. Bram smiled. This was the moment he had built in his mind for months, not just a speech, a declaration, a public rebirth without Vader. He gripped the podium. At Calaction, he began, we do not simply develop medicine, we create hope. And when I built Calaction into the company you see today, the screen changed, not slowly, not politely. Went black for one sharp second, then returned with a white slide and bold letters. Official ownership and governance disclosure in the control booth. Price Loman did not touch the emergency override. The file had been loaded through the approved Calaction media portal that morning, signed by Callow Reeve and authorized by the board resolution. The room quieted at once. Bram stopped speaking. A small laugh escaped him, the kind of laugh a man gives when he thinks a mistake has embarrassed someone else. He turned toward the screen. There seems to be a technical. The next slide appeared. Calaction Therapeutics majority ownership. Rhine Meridian Holdings. The air in the hall changed. Orin lowered his head. Sable's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair. Bram stared at the words as if they had been written in another language. Before he could speak, the slide changed again. Principal beneficial owner and founder, Dr. Solon Rhine. A wave of whispers moved through the hall. Nerissa's face drained of color. Torrin leaned forward. Elska's mouth opened slightly. Sable looked from the screen to Bram, then back again, as if the letters might rearrange into something less dangerous. The fourth slide appeared. It was an old photograph, a small research wing, plain walls, cheap metal chairs. A younger Dr. Solon Rhine stood in a white lab coat. Beside him stood a young girl with serious eyes and her hand wrapped around his sleeve. Vader. The caption read, Dr. Solon Rhine and Vader Rhine in Calaction's first research wing. The hall became louder now. People turned to one another. Some doctors pointed. Some investors lifted their phones. Journalists began typing. Bram's hand tightened around the podium until his knuckles whitened. The next slide appeared. Majority owner representative, Vader Rhine Calder. Incoming board chair appointment pending governance transition. For one heartbeat, Bram did not move. Then he turned toward the stage entrance. Vader walked out. She wore a simple dark dress, no diamonds, no dramatic smile, no shaking hands. Aurelia walked several steps behind her carrying a slim folder. Solon stood near the side of the stage, quiet and grave. Tamsin stood behind him with tears in her eyes. Merritt watched from the board section, his face full of old sadness and pride. Vader did not look like a woman coming to destroy someone. She looked like a woman who had finally stopped hiding. As she walked toward the microphone, her mind flashed back to the family dining room. Bram's voice returned like a bruise touched too soon. You are dead weight, Vader. I carried you long enough. Then another voice followed it. Aurelia's calm warning. Document first. Speak when truth can stand. Vader reached the microphone. The screen changed again behind her. Executive authority of Bram Calder suspended pending governance review. This time, the whispers became open shock. Bram stepped back from the podium. His face had lost its stage smile. Sable stood from her seat, but a board member near the aisle shook his head at security. Garen Pike, 48, the convention security lead assigned to the Calaction stage area, moved closer to the backstage entrance. He spoke quietly into his radio. Do not allow Ms. Voss backstage unless cleared by the board. Sable heard enough to understand. Her confidence cracked. Near the press section, Maurice Holt, 40, a medical journalist covering industry leadership and pharmaceutical ethics, raised her hand and called toward the board row. Was Ms. Voss involved in the convention materials that listed her as executive partner? Several heads turned toward Sable. Ketra, seated near the communications staff, lowered her eyes. Her phone was in her hand. On it were the screenshots she had already sent through counsel to Aurelia, messages from Sable, deletion requests, guest list edits, instructions to remove Vader and reduce Rhine Meridian references. Sable looked at Ketra. Ketra looked away. In that small movement, Sable understood she had tied herself to borrowed power, and borrowed power had just been called back. The screen changed one final time. Calaction reaffirms its founding mission, patient access before executive image. Vader looked across the room. She saw the doctors, the investors, the staff, the same kind of public audience Bram had wanted to use as proof of his greatness. Now they were witnesses to the truth he had tried to stand above. Bram grabbed a second microphone from the side of the podium. This is personal revenge, he snapped. The words rang through the hall. Every whisper died. Vader turned to him slowly. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes held everything he had forced her to carry. The affair, the dinner table, the moved chair, the ring beside the folder, the word dead weight. She spoke clearly. Personal revenge would have been me telling them what you did to me at that family table. This is corporate disclosure. Do not tempt me to explain the difference. Bram opened his mouth. No words came. For the first time since Vader had known him, the room did not wait for Bram to speak. It waited for him to be removed from the stage. Bram moved toward Vader like the stage still belonged to him. Vader, he snapped, pushing past the side of the podium. You do not get to walk away after doing this. The convention hall was still buzzing behind them. Doctors whispered. Journalists typed fast. Investors spoke in low, urgent voices. On the giant screen, Bram's suspension still glowed in clean white letters, colder than any insult he had ever thrown at her. Vader did not hurry. She stepped toward the backstage entrance with Solon at her side, Aurelia behind her, and Tamsin close enough to catch her if her strength failed. Merritt walked with the board members, carrying the same leather case that had once held old company files. Bram followed. For years, doors had opened for him at Calaction. Executive elevators, private boardrooms, investor suites, staff entrances, stage wings. This time, Garen Pike stepped in front of him. Mr. Calder, Garen said, calm but firm, you are no longer cleared for backstage access. Bram stared at him. I am the CEO, Callow answered from behind Vader. Your executive authority has been suspended pending governance review. The words hit harder than security's hand. Bram looked past Garen at Vader. You think this makes you powerful? Vader stopped. Slowly, she turned. No, she said. Power is what you thought you had when you used a family dinner to humiliate me. This is accountability. His face twisted. You hid behind your father. Vader's voice stayed quiet. I hid nothing from a man who never cared enough to ask who I was. That silenced even the staff near the hallway. Sable hurried toward them, but another security officer blocked her path. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I am Strategic Affairs Director. I have clearance. Callow looked at her. Your clearance is under review. Sable's eyes widened. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. Not embarrassed, not angry, afraid, because she understood the difference between Bram's power and company power. Bram could invite her into rooms. The board could remove her from them. Behind her, Nerissa pushed through the family row with Torrin and Elska following. How dare you, Nerissa said, her voice shaking with fury. After everything this family gave you. Vader looked at the woman who had watched her son call his wife dead weight and smiled as if cruelty were family discipline. What did you give me, Nerissa? Vader asked. A chair moved away from my husband, a room full of witnesses, a silence loud enough to tell me I never belonged. Nerissa's face tightened. You embarrassed my son. No, Vader said. Your son embarrassed himself. I only stopped the company from clapping for it. Torrin opened his mouth, but Elska grabbed his sleeve. For once, even gossip knew when to be quiet. Orin stepped forward slowly. His face was pale, but his voice was controlled. Vader, he said, perhaps we can discuss terms privately. Aurelia moved beside Vader. Mr. Pell, all further divorce communication goes through my office. All corporate matters go through the board's independent counsel. Do not blur those lines again. Orin looked away. That was the second fall. The first had been Bram losing the stage. The second was Orin losing the room. Inside a smaller backstage conference area, the board gathered quickly. The convention program outside continued with a brief delay announcement, but the real story had already moved faster than any schedule could control. Callow opened a formal folder. Bram Calder is suspended from executive duties pending investigation into misleading public statements, improper use of company resources, undisclosed conflict of interest involving Sable Voss, and attempted alteration of ownership references in convention materials. Bram laughed once. It sounded hollow. You cannot do this because of a divorce. Solon finally spoke. This is not because of a divorce. The room turned toward him. Solon looked older than he had in the archive room. But his voice carried the quiet force of a man who had built something from grief and refused to watch it become a crown for another man's ego. This is because Calaction was built to serve patients, and you tried to make it serve your image. Bram's lips parted. For years, he had dismissed Solon as a quiet old researcher, an old lab man, a shadow from Vader's family. Now that same man stood before him as the foundation under every title Bram had worn. Sable tried to recover. To Rhine, Bram made Calaction visible. He modernized the brand. He brought attention. Solon looked at her. Attention is not ownership, he said. Sable went still. Ketra entered with her attorney a few minutes later. Her face was pale, but she carried a printed packet. Sable stared at her as if betrayal had a body. Ketra placed the packet in front of Nomi. I was instructed to delete and alter files, she said, her voice shaking. I saved copies because I was afraid I would be blamed. Sable stepped forward. You liar. Nomi opened the packet. Screenshots, timestamps, guest list edits, messages about removing Vader, notes about making Sable appear beside Bram at the convention, instructions to reduce Rhine Meridian references, the final message about writing the story first. Callow did not raise his voice. Ms. Voss, he said, you are placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Sable turned to Bram. For 1 second, she looked at him the way she had looked at him in his office, on the stage, beside the cameras, as if he were the center of the world. But Bram was not the center anymore. He was a suspended executive with no room to offer her. Sable stepped back, just one step, then another, and Vader saw the exact moment promised by fate. Sable moved away from Bram like his power had become contagious. Bram saw it too. That hurt him more than the board resolution. You said you believed in me, he told Sable. Sable's face hardened into survival. I believed in your position. The words cut him open in a way Vader's silence never had. Outside, Maurice Holt and other journalists waited for the official statement. Inside, Aurelia reviewed the language before Callow released it. There would be no gossip statement, no dramatic revenge speech, no public list of marital wounds. The statement was clean. Calixion Therapeutics confirmed that its board had suspended Bram Calder's executive authority pending governance review. The company reaffirmed that majority ownership rested with Rhine Meridian Holdings, controlled by the Solon Rhine Family Trust. Dr. Solon Rhine's founding role was acknowledged. Vader Rhine Calder would serve as majority owner representative during the transition. Nothing more was needed. Truth did not need decorations. Later, when the hall had emptied and the cameras had moved outside, Vader returned alone to the main stage. The giant screen was dark now. No title, no applause, no public shock, just silence. She stood where Bram had stood and looked out at the empty seats. For a moment she saw the dining room again, the moved chair, Nerissa's pearls, Sable's smile, Bram's mouth forming the words that had split her life in two. You are dead weight, Vader. Then she saw something else, her mother's hand on hers. Her father's lab coat. The first patient letter, Leora crying with relief in the patient access wing, the old photograph of young Vader standing beside Solon in Calixion's first research wing. Vader finally understood. She had not been dead weight. He had been carrying history. Solon walked onto the stage quietly and stood beside her. You should not have had to prove your worth this way, he said. Vader looked at the blank screen. I know. Are you all right? She thought about the question. The honest answer was not yes, not yet. But she was no longer standing in a room begging to be valued by people who benefited from her invisibility. I will be, she said. Solon nodded. Aurelia joined them with the final folder in her hand. The divorce response is filed. The governance review is active. Bram cannot pressure you directly anymore. Vader breathed in slowly. Some endings did not feel like victory at first. Some felt like walking out of a burning house with smoke still in your lungs. Tamsin came next and slipped Vader's wedding ring into her palm. Vader had given it to her before stepping onto the stage, afraid her hand would shake. Vader looked at the ring for a long time. Then she walked to the edge of the stage, where a small table still held Bram's abandoned speech cards. She placed the ring on top of them, not because she was broken, because she was finished carrying what he had ruined. Weeks later, Calixion's patient access wing received a new sign. Rare Bridge Access Program founded in honor of Elian Rhine, protected by the Rhine Meridian Patient Promise. Leora Vale brought her son to the unveiling. Mina Sol stood beside the counter with tears in her eyes. Merritt watched from the hallway. Solon held Vader's hand. This time, Vader did not wear a visitor badge that hid her name. Her badge read, Vader Rhine Calder Majority Owner Representative Calixion Therapeutics, Renaa Holt, 26, a young mother applying for rare bridge access for her infant daughter, approached Vader after the ceremony and whispered, Thank you for keeping this place human. Vader smiled. For the first time in months, the smile did not hurt. Across town, Bram watched the news from a quiet apartment that did not know his name. No stage lights, no Sable, no Nerissa speaking for him, no employees waiting for orders, just a paused video of Vader standing beneath the company screen while the world learned who had truly been holding the foundation. He replayed her words once, then again. You will learn the difference between the woman standing behind you and the foundation holding you up. At last, he understood. But understanding came too late to save him. Back at Calaxian, Veda walked through the research history hallway. Her father's old photograph still hung behind glass. This time no one interrupted her, no one looked through her, no one called her ordinary. She stopped in front of the photograph and touched the frame gently. "I did not do it for revenge, Mom," she whispered. The hallway was quiet, but in that quiet she felt the answer. Power is only beautiful when it kneels to help someone. Veda turned away from the photograph and walked toward the patient access wing, where someone was already waiting for help. The company records had always known her name. Now the world did too. Dear viewers, if Veda's story reminded you of someone who was underestimated, subscribe, comment where you are watching from, and remember this: quiet people are not empty. Sometimes they are the foundation.